I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender. Capella University is rethinking higher education. With its game-changing FlexPath learning format, you can earn your degree on your schedule and fit your education seamlessly into your life. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network. Today on the James Altucher Show.
Well, first off, you've been an amazing futurist. You've been able to predict stuff with stunning accuracy based on kind of your experience as a policymaker, your experience as a technologist. Now you have this book, Life After Google, which predicts what's coming next in terms of innovation. And you point out some really interesting things about innovation over the past 20 or 30 years. And we'll talk about these predictions. What I'm also really fascinated by is what you just said, which is, how does one become a futurist? Like, I don't want to just read a futurist's stuff. I want to be smart enough to know what's coming.
You want to know how to be a futurist?
Yes.
That's sort of what my sense of, I've just been 2 weeks in China. You know, my book
really?
was allegedly number 2 in China. I don't believe it. And, but
I would believe it because they hate Google so much.
I know. Well, something happened, and I did 40 appearances in 9 days.
Holy
after
shit.
an earlier trip where I did a press conference for 5 hours with 200, 300 reporters. It's really amazing. China has grasped life after Google. And
Are you recording this? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, and then I'll do the intro later. I don't have energy to even do more than one podcast a day.
Yeah.
How do you do 40 appearances in 9 days? You're 79 years old, super futurist George Gilder, author of Life After Google. That was the beginning of the intro. How do you have the energy? What do you do for energy?
Well, I run probably 5 miles a day, roughly.
You run 5 miles a day?
Well, often more. I ran 10 miles on Sunday. Unfortunately, I stepped on a ice puddle and pulled my Achilles, so it was a very painful run. And in walking up to your stand-up New York was painful on my Achilles, but I do run. I've won 10 straight age group in road races, from half marathons to 10Ks.
Okay, so how do you even, I mean, I'm 50, you're essentially going to be 80 within a year. How do you have the energy to run 5 miles a day?
Well, I mean, I've done it all my life. I really feel it's necessary to my whole metabolism.
Has it become
and
more difficult?
It's like I slow down. I mean, I run half as fast as I did as a kid. I run. I would run 4:30 miles as a kid. Now I run 9-minute miles or 8. Something for half marathons. And
Do you take supplements or what do you?
no, I don't particularly take supplements. What do I take? I don't. I really don't. I don't consume lots of vitamins.
Do you think it's genetics? Like clearly. I'm
Well,
just
my
trying
mother's 100 now, and she celebrated her 100th birthday by playing a little concert with Yo-Yo Ma. So she still can play the piano at 100. So I do have good genes, but I just love running. I mean, it's just been the way I keep alert and awake and rev myself up. It's important to me. If I don't, I've got a very grim 6 weeks ahead of me because of my Achilles. I hope that I'm going to be able to cross country ski, and I think I will be, but it's not a sure thing.
And other than that, we're going to get into the books and the investing, which is obviously, high energy activities, even though people often might not think they are. But what other things do you do at the age of 80 where people say, George, are you crazy? You're 80, almost 80 years old. Why are you doing this?
Well, I run up mountains. I like to do that. When I go to out west in the winter, I ski up the Vale or Aspen or one of these mountains. I ski Beaver Creek. I ski up and then ski down, so I don't have to pay for the.
So of course, you ski up at the age of 80, up the highest mountains in the world.
Well,
Why not?
I was out at Jackson Hole, where they have the Fed meeting every year. We had an anti-Fed meeting. American Principals had an anti-Fed meeting out there. And I impressed everybody by running up the Jackson Hole Peak there.
So you stay, you've been active in like either book writing, futurism, and at first policy making since like the 60s.
Yeah.
So you're still pretty active. You go to these meetings. I don't think I would do that at maybe I should think to myself.
I don't know. Look at you. You've already caught up with me in number of books written, and
we've both
you
written
got
19 books. Your
a
book
comedy club. I did start a record company at one point.
Oh, really?
To support. My brother was a country music singer, and I published his record and tried to create a record company.
So this is fascinating that, your whole, so now I'll get into the full intro. George Gilder, he just wrote a book, Life After Google, which, suggests, the beginnings of the end of companies like Google, and you give a whole treatise why, which we'll get into. But like you mentioned, you've written 19 books. You've been a futurist for a long time. Your book, Life After Television, I believe written in 1990, for instance, accurately predicts, smartphones.
Want me to do my number? I said the computer of the future would be as portable as your watch, as personal as your wallet. It would recognize speech. It would navigate streets. It would collect your mail and your news. It just might not do windows, but it would do doors, open doors to your future. And Steve Jobs did read the book and distribute it to friends. So I believe that I had some vague influence on the evolution of the iPhone. But that's
and smartphones in general, whether you were involved in the revolution of it or just predicting it is still amazing. Because even though Moore's law, which suggests, computing power doubles every 2 years, might have suggested that, you accurately taking these laws and saying, what does that actually mean 5, 10, 20 years in the future, it was really amazing. And you've written 19 books in total. Before that, you were heavily involved in policy, like you were a speechwriter for Nelson Rockefeller, George Romney, Nixon. Am I correct?
Nixon, yeah.
Well, I just want to ask about this, and then we'll get into the futurist stuff. What's a good political speech? Like, what are the components of a good political speech?
My rule with speech writing was to see the candidate as little as possible, because what the candidate really wants is the best speech for a particular situation, and I want to do the best possible speech that I could write for that situation, and if I talk to the candidate about what he wants to say, then I have to pay excessive attention to his often casual ideas about the event.
Right,
My rule when I was working in the Senate for Senator Mathias of Maryland, and I would work all night and write my speeches and deliver them in the morning and then go and sleep during the day. With most the better the candidate was, the worse the speeches, I thought. Jacob Javits, for example, I wrote speeches for him, and he knew exactly what he wanted to say already. He was ferociously articulate and had virtually no use for me. But Richard Nixon, he just assigned speeches, and I didn't have to talk to him or anything. I'd deliver the speeches through Haldeman and Ehrlichman, the whole channel. And Nixon would deliver them word for word. It was very gratifying writing speeches for Nixon.
I feel like we could do a whole podcast on this. So I just want to ask you like one or two more questions. So what's interesting is like Nelson Rockefeller, Charles Matthias, they at that time were talking mid 70s. Yeah. They were sort of representing the liberal wing of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Richard Nixon, it was always kind of unclear. He came from McCarthyism, but he had some liberal tendencies as well. And I would imagine with someone like Nixon, he didn't trust himself to make his own speech because of his experience with Kennedy, where him being authentic failed for him. And so maybe that's why he would just trust the speechwriter.
Yeah, he really did trust the speechwriters, and he had good speechwriters.
Roger Ailes
and Buchanan, was terrific. He's one of the great speechwriters of our time. Pat Buchanan.
Pat Buchanan versus Ted Sorensen. Who's better?
I think Pat Buchanan was a lot better than Ted Sorensen. Ted Sorensen could do these ding-dong sort of phrases that live in history because they were delivered by a successful president who died young. But I think Pat Buchanan was... I disagree with Pat on a lot of stuff, but Pat Buchanan was the best I saw for just really composing a beautiful, poetic speech, and for a candidate who would deliver it word for word. That was...
So again, what would you say are the components? What are the kind of, let's say, 5 points you would have to hit in a political speech, and you would know, okay, this is going to be a good political speech?
I don't think of. I think my essential thesis is that the reason politicians are so boring, the reason you really don't want to listen to them when they speak most of the time, is that they are the product of market surveys. They're product of polls. They try to tell the audience what it already thinks. And there's nothing so boring as to being told what you already think in a slightly smoother version. It's a zero entropy speech. In information theory terms, it has no information in it. And because if everything I say today you already know, which is a real possibility,
I doubt
there
that.
will be zero entropy in my communications.
But then again, you take a look at, like, I'm just going to use Sorensen as an example with his most famous speech. Ask not what you can do for your country. Ask what you can do. Ask what your country can do for you. There's that. What's it called? Anaphora. There's this speech
Anaphora,
technique. Yeah. So it seems like the ability to use these techniques to kind of, almost like grasp the mind who's listening is really the point of the speechwriter.
Yeah, it's the point of the poet too. I mean, it's phrasing things in ways that are more memorable and have more adhesive impact.
And your point about zero information being spread, that reminds me of the basis of hypnotism. So a hypnotist can't hypnotize someone who doesn't already want to be hypnotized. Oh. They have to get you to do something you already want to do. Right. And it seems like that's what politicians, you're saying, are sort of doing. It's like almost a form of hypnosis on the audience.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting... I'm interested in hypnosis and psychic phenomena and such, and I believe they do entail distracting the rational faculties and allowing the unconscious powers of the mind to come to the fore.
Have you ever seen an example of that where you didn't understand what was happening?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I believe that psychic powers are real, and that we've kind of forgotten them in this era. Science has spuriously disproven the existence of psychic powers, and thus has blinded itself to whole dimensions of the mind that actually distinguish human minds from AI and all these other possibilities.
And yet the example of you is pretty interesting, because let's tie that into futurism. Obviously, they call it, like, scientists call it futurism, but in prior generations they would call it prophecy for the same exact thing, which is of course related to, ideas beyond our comprehension. Do you think it's connected?
Well, I don't think you can explain how you think. I think thought is a product of consciousness. Most neuroscientists imagine that consciousness is an epiphenomenon and a side effect of thought, that they understand logical processing, and they imagine that if logical processing is accelerated to high enough rate, that somehow consciousness will emerge. And I believe that this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the mind, and it undermines much of the neuroscience, the prevailing neuroscience, and almost all the computer science that purports to be imitating minds.
So we're gonna gradually use this to segue into the heart of your book, because you make a point in Life After Google, which I think is excellent, and which I could speak to from a different angle. But artificial intelligence is not what people think. It's not like suddenly some robot is going to be stocking shelves in Walmart and suddenly wake up and be human. There's no such thing.
That's right.
Like there's no. It's 100% of artificial intelligence, people don't realize, is essentially advanced statistics combined with faster and faster computer processing speeds.
That's right.
And that's enough to fool people into, it's acting like a human. Just because it recognizes your face using very complicated statistics and very fast NVIDIA graphics processing chips doesn't mean it's smart. Doesn't mean it knows the taste of an apple is good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So why do you think, and I remember this from 1990 being in graduate school, that the professors knew this. Like, they would use artificial intelligence, that phrase, to get grants from the government because the government was stupid and they wanted to think that computers would come awake. They knew the computers can't just awaken. But why do people still think in this thing, this singularity, where all of a sudden all this data combined with all the statistics, and you're gonna have like, a sexy robot wake up?
I think it's the materialist superstition. I think it's...
But it's really smart people now who believe that computers are going to just quote unquote wake up.
Well, the smartest people in the world believe in the materialist superstition. They believe that the universe is explicable entirely in terms of chemistry and physics, and that assumption, I believe, is manifestly false. But it is a religious conviction underlying almost all neuroscience and computer science. And the amazing thing is it's utterly disproven by the computer itself. You can know the position of every atom and molecule in a computer and not have the slightest idea what it is accomplishing. What the computer's function is at that point is utterly opaque to a physicist who knows everything about the physical substrate of all the chips in the computer. So why do you imagine that understanding all the molecules and atoms of the brain will define a human mind? And I gather, and I think it's preposterous. It doesn't. And the materialist superstition is disproven supremely in the very computer science that underlies all these great companies in Silicon Valley that are leading us off a cliff today, where they imagine that they're going to usurp human minds and destroy employment, necessitate a guaranteed annual income for all of us to retreat to beaches, and while Bren and Paige fly off with Elon Musk to some nearby planet in a winner-take-all universe.
There's kind of three different directions I want to go with what you just said. One of them is like really in the weeds on information theory, so maybe I'll leave that until post-podcast. But let's take the artificial intelligence stuff. Well, first off, you've been an amazing futurist. You've been able to predict stuff with stunning accuracy based on kind of your experience as a policymaker, your experience as a technologist. You've really had well thought out and correct predictions over the years. Now you have this book, Life After Google, which predicts what's coming next in terms of innovation. And you point out some really interesting things about innovation over the past 20 or 30 years. But I want to start off first with what you just said about artificial intelligence and what you referred to. I'll refer to it as universal basic income. This idea that AI is going to supplant so many jobs that eventually humans are going to need to make just free income from the government or whatever.
Yeah.
And so let's just pursue that for a second, and then I want to get to kind of some of the main predictions in Life After Google. But so I can think of two examples. One is when horses were replaced by cars, the people working on horses got jobs working on cars. And the other thing is when ATMs came out, everyone thought, oh, that would be the end of bank tellers. But it just increased the profits of banks, and they put up more branches, and more bank tellers were hired.
Yeah, well, this is the key point, which I've said for decades, so it's not a novelty, is that people don't get employed because they're unproductive. You don't employ somebody because they're a bad comedian, and you can employ if they're no good.
We might hear, but yes.
And artificial intelligence and all other technologies enhance human productivity and thus render humans more employable, while at the same time generating the capital to endow new work.
So let's break that up, because there's two things there. One is, if you have robots shelving Walmart instead of 100,000 people putting products on the shelves of all the Walmarts, yes, Walmart will have an increase in profits, an increase in billions of dollars of cash, and you're basically saying, and this is related to all your stuff in the 80s on supply side economics, but you're basically saying that $1 billion will find its way into new companies of the economy that will employ people.
Yeah.
So the people who say the opposite say, for the first time ever, the people who were only good at shelving shelves, where are they going to go? Because now it's only robots. So now there isn't an industry replacing them, it's robots replacing them.
Well, I just think the whole, to go job by job that way in a kind of micro analysis isn't very effective. I mean, I can't predict exactly what each person in Walmart is going to end up doing. I can predict that in a much wealthier society, there will be more projects, that each individual will be more productive, capable of a greater variety of functions, and unleashed to more creativity, and thus more and better and safer and more creative and exciting jobs will result. Right now, shelving products at Walmart must be one of the dreariest jobs on earth, and all through the history of economics. Technologies have emerged and replaced the worst jobs and released human beings to do better things. And I believe that the current changes, partly because of a cultural shift against industry, reflecting a lot of people's satisfaction with their own material achievements or material possibilities, that as a result of this, the change is rather less dramatic than the change of the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century. That was when everybody left the farms and entered the cities and the factories. That was a complete transformation, and most of the Luddite propositions were introduced during that period with the same kind of confidence that people bring to bear today on AI, artificial intelligence, and they were completely disproven. The more investment in machines during the Industrial Revolution, the more jobs, better pay, greater longevity, more possibilities. There was no meaningful destruction of jobs during the Industrial Revolution.
And I have an example with internet technology that totally agrees with you, but I'll get to that in a second. There's one thing to say when we read Life After Google and we see all your predictions, or your older book, Life After Television, or your other books where you make all these predictions. What I'm also really, and we'll talk about these predictions, what I'm also really fascinated by is what you just said, which is, how does one become a futurist? Like, I don't want to just read a futurist's stuff. I want to be smart enough to know what's coming. And what you just said makes very common sense. So I'll give you my example. When the web was getting big, so in 1994, nobody knew what the World Wide Web was in corporate America. And when corporate America was writing networking applications, they would often write their own networking protocols. And so there was all these network software engineers in business, smart, educated, even PhD people who, once the web was around, they were all out of a job, it would seem.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, it wasn't like a whole class of PhDs and network engineers became unemployed and started working at McDonald's. Like, they found other things to do.
Yeah.
They started companies. They were smart enough to develop other ways to use their skill sets. So the internet itself should have like wiped out millions and millions of jobs, and it simply didn't. The economy is at its highest
and
point
it's
ever.
a vast transformation, the internet itself.
Right.
I mean, it's not a small thing. And the fact the internet itself multiplied jobs overwhelmingly for its victims, software engineers, found a huge proliferation of opportunities. It's just a fact of life that suppression of technology destroys jobs. And so the big threat to employment in the world is Luddites, is people who imagine that we have to, that the new technologies will wreak havoc on employment. They will wreak havoc on employment, but they also will release all sorts of new possibilities and new employment.
So history agrees with you, because we could find 1,000 examples.
Yeah.
We could even find examples from your own predictions 20 years ago or 30 years ago. But Elon Musk doesn't agree with you.
Yeah. Well, Elon Musk is a brilliant entrepreneur, but he's a fool in many ways.
Right, and so because he said we're going to need a universal basic income.
Yeah.
But what I want to know is, how does what tool set are you reaching into to be so accurately a futurist? Like, what are you looking at, and how do you think about problems so you can come up with this assessment? Because it's very clear. Oh yeah, technology is going to create more jobs, and that's what's always happened throughout history. Mm-hmm. Why doesn't everyone think this? Well, a lot of people don't think this. So what are you doing right now?
Well, because I really am a generalist. I mean, I began writing about sex and family. Those were although my very first book was about politics. It was called The Party That Lost Its Head. It was about the Goldwater era. And I wrote it with my college roommate, Bruce Chapman, who's still writing books today at the Discovery Institute. But I started writing about politics. I then wrote about sex. Then I wrote about poverty. And then I saw that to understand poverty, you really had to understand wealth. And so I wrote about economics, and my first major book about economics was called Wealth and Poverty, and it sold literally millions of copies around the world. It was the #1 book in France for 6 months. It was Ronald Reagan's favorite book for years. I was Ronald Reagan's most quoted living authors. But that was Wealth and Poverty, was economics. But as I wrote that, the most exciting thing I've encountered was a cover story. You want to know how to be a futurist?
Yes.
I read a cover story in Time magazine about the microchip. And that was my introduction to the microchip. And I decided this was the most exciting thing happening in the world. So I would stop. I mastered economics. Other economists were not selling millions of copies of their books. So I decided to learn microchips. And I thought to really understand what microchips meant to me was a real shift of all technology. Until then, physics was mostly about exerting forces on materials and moving them from outside. But microchips seemed to be the first technology that consisted of manipulating matter from the inside and really reducing matter in a way, or expanding matter, if you wish, through information. And so this seemed to be a fundamental pivot in the history of technology. And so I wrote 4 books on microchips, and then fiber optics seemed to me to be the most exciting thing happening. So I wrote about fiber optics.
And of course, it's the combination of the two computers. So essentially, let me unpack it. So previously, matter would move from somebody would manufacture something, would manufacture matter like a car, and it would get transported to someone else, and that's how things moved around. Or someone would print something in a newspaper, and it would be delivered to somebody, and that's how even information was transmitted. So now, what the microchip did in the mind of a future, I'm just trying to reverse engineer the mind of a futurist. What you saw was, okay, now information is scalable. Now there's like no stop to how information can spread. And particularly when we combine it with the fact that computers are getting faster all the time, you ask the question, what does this mean? And that's kind of, you're asking, given a new state of the world, what does this mean? And you start to think of all the things that it might mean, and you eliminate the things that are ridiculous based on and this is where being a generalist comes in, based on your information of economics. Okay, information is not going to be used to, create more flowers and peace in the world, but it will be used for this, and this.
Well, that's pretty much. And I met Carver Mead, who was, the Caltech professor, who was Gordon Moore's researcher at Intel, and who both did the research and named Moore's Law. So from the very beginning, my teacher was Carver Mead, who was, in my view, the most brilliant figure in technology of the last half century or so.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players, and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So, I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply.
So that means I left out one thing in terms of the making of a futurist. I said one is you look at all the new innovations and see what it could possibly mean. The second is being a generalist allows you to see how this might affect different areas of life. And because so many people are narrow educated with their PhDs, being a generalist allows you to see across disciplines. But the third thing is, and I noticed this in your book, Life After Google, you actually go out and meet everybody. and it's one thing if you read them, it's another thing you go out and you meet the founders of blockchain and Ethereum and all this stuff, and you meet as many people as possible, and you go to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. What's the importance of meeting people in futurism as opposed to just reading them?
Well, if you're writing about technology, most of the key figures don't write, or if they do write, it's relatively meager technical documents. So in order to really cover Silicon Valley, as I did back with Rich Karlgaard and Forbes ASAP, I helped launch Forbes ASAP with Rich Karlgaard, and I went out there, and in order to cover what was going on, you had to go to the companies and talk to the engineers who were designing the products. They weren't writing. There was nothing you could read that could tell you what John Musoris was doing at MicroUnity, or what was happening in the optical industry, Will Hicks, all these people were on frontiers building new devices and did not have time to actually write about them. I could read the books, but the books were all out of date by the time I wanted to write on the subjects they addressed.
So you would be able to take your theories based on generalism and the fact that you knew what innovations were happening, and then sort of run these theories by actually meeting the people, run these theories against them and see how they responded and what they were working on and so on, and thus developed your futuristic notions. But let me ask you, where do mutual funds get it wrong? Because mutual funds are visiting the companies too, like a tech mutual fund.
They don't. The mutual funds really, it's a sad picture, but they're terrified by insider trading laws, and so they really are part of what I call the outsider trading scandal. I mean, it's all significant investment is insider trading. I mean, you have to have an intimate inside knowledge of these companies and their technologies and their inventions and their strategies, and you really can't have that kind of information just reading what are increasingly the products of public relations firms and lawyers and these technology companies. So I think that mutual funds are pretty worthless. I mean, they're increasingly depleting the sources of real investment information that animates a successful and creative economy.
And of course they're draining fees from society along the way.
Yeah.
But so let's look at really good investing then. It seems to have one of two forms. One is an investor does the work like you, meeting people, and let's not call it insider, but let's call it an intimate information.
Yeah, intimate, right? Yeah.
Because no one's saying, hey, this drug's about to be approved, you should buy it. That's like kind of the illegal insider trading. But on the other side, mutual funds are too scared to get any information.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, if you today, the way the SEC works is it runs an AI program essentially across the markets and identifies anomalies, which are unexpected profits, and assumes that unexpected profits are prima facie evidence of wrongdoing. So they've intimidated all investors. So they can't really explore companies closely anymore. So returns across the markets have bifurcated. They're in Warren Buffett or Google or one of these companies that accumulates large amounts of capital and never invests it without utter intimate inside knowledge of the companies they purchase. Or it's venture capitalists who never invest $1 without intimate knowledge.
And then there it's legal.
And they're legal. This is where all the action happens. And all the rest of the market is almost devoid of information now. It's based on the proposition that accounting data is actually significant. It's all rear view mirror. It's almost meaningless. And so how mutual funds function, which is another abuse of artificial intelligence from my point of view, is just to survey all these accounting data for anomalies of various kinds that are correlated with outperformance. And so it's really, and it has no real valid investment content from my point of view.
And yet, just for instance, you visiting a computer and seeing a computer company and seeing, oh, they're working on a new chip. Mutual funds might be afraid of that, but it's not really inside information because you don't really know if that means the stock's going to go up or it might even go down because of that chip. Like it's not real. It's not, the SEC would not consider that inside information, but the mutual funds are afraid because they don't understand technology.
Because of this disbelief in human creativity. These models of the economy and of business that are or that are the basis of investment are all false. They're all based on the idea that essentially creativity is sort of a random accident, and that if you markets are completely efficient and ultimately deterministic, and so that if you have an exceptional result, it's probably the evidence for a crime. And this is really what is taught, and it's what is it dominates computer science. It dominates the SEC. It dominates the prevailing wisdom in most of our university economics faculties. I mean, Paul Romer, who is the most brilliant of the economists, who focuses on entrepreneurship. He's at Berkeley. He just won the Nobel Prize for his theories of entrepreneurship. And do you know how he defines entrepreneurship? It's the reassemblage of chemical elements. And he points out his great insight is that there are lots of chemical elements, and they combine in all sorts of ways. There are huge degrees of freedom in the domain of chemical elements. So entrepreneurs actually have quite a lot of freedom in their activity, but it's all ultimately a function of chemical elements. In other words, the desire in these universities to uphold the materialist superstition is so powerful that they can't see that entrepreneurs operate in domains of information, imagination, counterfactuals, projections of all kinds, in manifesting absolute creativity.
So when you say chemical elements, is that like a metaphor in the sense that, like let's take Uber. One chemical is empty seats in a car. Another component is, you need some way to. Another chemical is you need a way to mediate transactions. Another chemical is,
Romer is talking about actual chemicals. Chip is silicon and oxygen and all indium phosphide, whatever it is, aluminum. He's talking about the chemicals that comprise all matter. And his view is that all enterprise consists of taking these chemicals, which are the material endowment of the universe, and putting them together in different ways is what enterprise is about. That's what invention is. It's a purely material process. He recognizes the existence of things called recipes, and he believes that entrepreneurs experiment with different recipes, and these recipes might identify a particular and differentiate an automobile from microchip or airplane or steel mill or insurance policy. I just think that the orientation toward materialism is crippling, and that's what they are, fundamentally materialists.
Well, I want to ask you what you mean by materialist, but this is I want to segue into the life after Google. I love your statement in the book that if you're getting something for free, that means you're the product. And I thought that was genius because I never thought of that before.
That's not me. That's Tim Cook of Apple, I think. I don't know who told Tim, but it's...
But you repeat it in the book. And I never thought about, like, for instance, with Google, I always thought, oh, well, Google's customer are the advertisers, which is sort of true. That's how they make their money. They sell you. But what's happening is they're selling you to the advertiser. So you're the product. And the search engine is just this vehicle to get you to the advertiser. And it made me think of all these freemium type things where I'm essentially the product. And depending on how little I pay, or free to discounted to whatever, along the way, I'm the product. And that's and your point was essentially that this big data combined with advertising is sort of bringing about the downfall of the current crop of Silicon Valley companies in the long run.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true, because it's a way to avoid prices. And I've just come from 10 days in China, where the big Chinese companies, Baidu, Tencent, Alibaba, ByteDance, these big new Chinese companies all get about 10 to 15% of their revenues from advertising, while Google and Facebook get 95%. And ultimately, ads, if you're on the internet, you know that ads aren't ads. They're minuses. They're values subtracted. And so ultimately...
are they? Let me contest a little bit on that, because part of Google's appeal is that instead of me seeing random ads, they show me ads that I might be more interested in.
That's absolutely true. And that's why Google is dominant now. They're dominant in this era because as they really followed, in my view, although not explicitly, but they followed what I prescribed in Life After Television. I mean, I believe that I want Google and these companies to know as much as possible about me so that they don't inflict ads that I don't want to see. That was the whole message. It was a theme of Life After Television, was that in the future, because of the internet, we'd no longer have to watch ads that we didn't want to see. And that depended on these companies invading our privacy. And I wanted these companies to invade our privacy more rather than less. What's offensive are all the uncanny valley experiences where they almost know what we want, but actually don't, and are offensive in their misunderstanding of our actual desires.
So what you just said is really interesting, because this applies to what you earlier said about, in terms of what makes what makes a futurist is having a generalist ability, having an ability to look across domains. So you used the phrase just now, uncanny valley, which is a phrase I've never heard in this particular context, but it makes, as soon as you say it, it makes like brilliant sense. The phrase uncanny valley comes from the virtual reality world, where the virtual reality is not 100% accurate. So the brain actually like your body feels nauseous.
That's
like
right.
the brain actually turns your body off because it knows this is not the real world. And they haven't figured out they call it the uncanny valley because they haven't figured out how to cross it yet. But you applying it to Google and big data, you're basically saying Google is trying, with their invasion of your privacy, to reconstruct this virtual you so they know the exact ads for you. Now they're slightly off, like maybe they're 80% there. So instead they throw up these ads that are almost there, but you get that same feeling of nausea you would get in virtual reality. And so I just unpacked what you said, but is that roughly?
That's exactly right. And however, I think that it's a more serious problem with the ads. I mean, on your smartphones, you really don't want ads most of the time. I mean, you want to be able to look for ads, but to have ads popped up at you is offensive on a smartphone. And as I say, if your phone is really smart, the first thing you wanted to do is block ads, because ads are about 30%, consume about 30 to 40% of the bandwidth on the smartphone. They slow down your smartphone, and you almost never want to see them. You only click through on 0.06% of ads, and half the click-throughs are by mistake. So the actual click-through rate is about 0.03% of the ads. And that's a click-through rate that maybe suffices if you're a Nigerian prince trying to sell gold mines to gullible grandmothers, but it's spam for a major company. And they're all colliding with this problem today. And the Chinese companies are not colliding with this problem. The Chinese companies have really figured out what people want to do on their smartphones. And that's why they're
charging for it.
They're charging for it.
So, like, what's an example?
Micropayments of all WeChat has all these little icons and avatars and ways to communicate, and they charge you. They figured out all sorts of ways to collect money. That most of their revenues come from collecting money from customers who purchase various digital products online to enhance their internet experience, whether it's with a game or with meeting people or whatever it is. And they don't depend on advertising, on value subtracted intrusions on the attention of their customers, and that's why they're going to be a really a big threat to the four big companies in the world today. The four biggest market cap companies are Microsoft, Apple, Google, and
Facebook? Or?
No, not Facebook. Facebook's about number 7. It's Amazon.
But Amazon charges. They
I don't think I'm often said to be predicting doom for Amazon. I don't. I think Amazon really has figured out how to charge. However, they depend on a walled garden model, and I think that the walled garden model is going to break down. You're going to have to learn how to collect money in a universe of communications that you can't control yourself. All these companies want to control their customers, and in that effort to control customers is, although reasonable if you're in a mall where you get attracted to one store and you can't be in several stores at once, but on the internet you potentially can be many places at once, and you can compare prices across boundaries, and it's a whole different challenge.
So many things to unpack there. So one is, in your book, I was fascinated that I did not know this. Usually we think of Google as a search engine and Amazon as a store. Yeah. But actually, product search, like if I search what is the best computer, I'm doing. You made the point in the book that more product searches now happen on Amazon than on Google. Yeah. So I didn't know that. Second thing is the concept of walled garden. I think the first example is Apple. You couldn't. A lot of times when you bought a microcomputer, and even now, if you buy a gaming computer, you can pull out a chip, you can put in a faster chip, and so on. Apple computers, you can't take them apart. You can't change them in any way. The operating system is fixed. You can't change it. No outside developer can change it. Only Apple makes Apple computers. Whereas like Google, Android, the Android operating system, which is the most popular operating system in the world now, is not a walled garden. Any phone company can use Android, change it however they want, and that's how they became the most popular in the world. So that's walled garden versus unwalled garden. But Amazon might be different in that there are studies that show I'd rather buy the same product, even if it's more expensive, on Amazon than on the product's own website. And so Amazon has some advantage by being a trusted walled garden.
Definitely, they have a big advantage, and they have a security advantage. They've got one-click shopping, which is obviously desirable, and all sites should have it. It's Amazon is one of the dominant companies of this era because they've mastered that walled garden model, actually pioneered and mastered it. And I'm just saying that because that model doesn't work across national boundaries very well, because it doesn't work across protocol boundaries very well, because it now opens you to all sorts of credit card theft and combinatorial explosions of PINs and usernames and passwords and then security questions and iris scans ultimately. And the model of the walled garden is at its peak today, and it's collapsing. It's going to collapse because micropayments are going to be feasible, and cross-protocol communications are going to get increasingly facile, and this effort to isolate your customer is going to break down more and more as years pass.
So isolate your customer, meaning the intermediary. So Amazon's really an intermediary between the sellers and the customers. And so Amazon isolates them so that the maker of a product doesn't know the customer, but Amazon knows the customer because it's the intermediary. So I want to stay on that point, but where we're eventually heading is that there's going to be more peer-to-peer, that the seller will know the customer directly, and Amazon won't be in the middle as an intermediary.
Right.
And that might happen. And that's, by the way, that might happen with Uber. So right now, Uber is the wall between the car and the customer. Airbnb is the wall between the house and the customer, and so on. But and it's because of the trust of the platform, because the walled garden is trustworthy somehow. There's a trust factor. But we'll get to that in a second. Walk me through, because this is the hardest to kind of believe. Google seems to have such a strong moat on just search. Walk me through how Google could eventually lose trust with customers, and we won't use Google.
Well, I think we'll use Google. I mean, IBM is still an important company. Microsoft has returned to the lead among, the biggest market cap company in the world. I think at this moment might be Microsoft.
But it's because they switched models. Like IBM was a typewriter company, then it was a mainframe company, and now who's developing blockchain for Walmart? IBM. So they morph. It's like Nokia used to make boots, and then they became the world's biggest handset manufacturer.
Right.
But Google, every time they've tried to do something new, they can't make money out of it. They only make money out of search.
Yeah, and I think that's this. They're too ready to give their product away for free. They aren't being inventive about collecting money from customers. And in a capitalist economy, if you aren't collecting money from customers, you really don't have customers. You avoid any liabilities to customers.
But they're collecting money from The advertisers.
The advertisers. Those are their customers, and they're a relatively small number, and they bought a whole set of advertising assets that allow them to dominate this market. And they do very well in many aspects of it, and they aid lots of small businesses in reaching their markets. And you know, I like what Google is doing, but I don't think it's going to be a successful long-term strategy. They are not developing the key capabilities of collecting money from lots of different customers in diverse markets. And they are beginning to do it. It's just they're a bit slow, and they're too, because they don't have to actually collect money, they can, you know, they can do whatever they want. A space shot one day, windmills or loons the next day. You know, they don't have to really buckle down and envisage a full supply chain ending with a market where they collect money successfully from their customers in a profitable
and so what
form.
So here's where we get to the crux of your book, and I wanna talk about this as long as we can. But the way they sort of, it reminds me actually of the hypnotism discussion. So users think they're getting something for free. Google tells the users, oh, you're getting something for free, so it's what the users want. And so we buy into the fact that really we're giving away all of our data so that they could resell that to advertisers, and they make money from the advertisers. Yeah. And they hypnotize us with, oh, you could trust us, don't worry, we're Google. Our saying used to be, do no evil. And this really applies to all of these companies. And where you go in your book is that trust can be transferred over now from Google and similar companies to this new kind of software innovation, the blockchain. Yeah. And that's where trust will start to build. So what do you see as kind of the time frame for that, and the development of that, and so on?
Well, I think that the time frame is now. I mean, it's happening now. You know, when people look at what's been achieved by the blockchain, I think the biggest achievement so far is to solve the IPO crisis in the United States. I mean, we have a 90% drop in initial public offerings over the last 20 years. And the number of public companies on the stock market has dropped almost 60%. I mean,
yeah, people don't want to deal with being public.
Yeah, they don't want to deal with being public. They don't want to, and the number of startups has actually declined. It's having a little flurry now, but we have fewer startups, and I think so. The biggest contribution so far from the blockchain, I think, is the Ethereum blockchain and its platform for initial coin offerings or initial crypto offerings or whatever you want to call them, which has raised $20 billion for several thousand companies over the last 12 months. I mean, it's a tremendous feat.
So even though there's been a decline in cryptocurrency prices, you're separating that out from the blockchain technology. You're seeing many more companies doing these ICOs to raise money. Like nobody's running away from the ICOs, even though they're running away from the crypto a little bit.
Well, the government has sent subpoenas to a lot of people who had successful ICOs. So the government's now trying to do to ICOs what they've already done to IPOs. They pretty much extinguished IPOs except for gigantic companies like Uber. And now they're moving on to ICOs. But I think they understand the problem. You know, there have been a lot of statements by the SEC that say they don't want to suppress innovation in this area. And let's hope that we don't drive all the ICOs to Zug, Switzerland, or Singapore, or some other country, because that's what we're doing right now.
But that's just it, though. Just like the internet couldn't be stopped because it's not a national phenomenon; it's a global phenomenon. No one could say, "Oh, we're gonna make this thing illegal on the internet here, and then it's legal everywhere else," because the few times that's occurred, there's always workarounds. And the internet is basically just this uniform global platform. And so is Bitcoin and blockchain. So assuming, and Trump just hired a chief of staff that's basically pro blockchain and pro crypto. So what do you see? What's going to happen
I don't
next?
even know who it is.
John Kelly. He was.
Well, John Kelly.
Was it? Who? Malbani, yeah, so he's pro ICO.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm delighted to hear that. That's wonderful news. I did hear that Mulvaney had taken over, but I didn't know that he's pro crypto. Yes. That's a good development, and I think in general the Trump administration is trying to accommodate cryptocurrencies, and so that's a better sign than China, which is trying to suppress them at the moment, or at least sequester them so that you're allowed to pursue cryptocurrencies as long as they don't intrude in the real economy.
Well, I think also because China, while it has different views on privacy, like we're talking right now about customer privacy, China, the place where they're a little, more authoritarian still as opposed to capitalist is they want human privacy for their own purposes. But what do you see are the next steps in kind of the, crypto had this kind of hype at the end of 2017. It went up to these, the coins themselves went up to these high prices. Now it had what many are calling just a normal slump that we've seen before. We saw it in 2014. We saw it in 2010. What are the next steps? What do you see happening?
Well, I always that we're in the. I have a diving board model of entrepreneurship. The entrepreneur goes up on the diving board and he preens and shows off his muscles and asks for money and he finally is ready and he dives and you don't see him and this happens thousands of times across the economy, and all the people around the swimming pool say these guys are never going to come up. They're gone. That's the end of them. But meanwhile, they're just obsessively working on their products. Most of them. There have been some Ponzi's and some fantasies and some frauds, but in general, these are the most serious technologists in the world today are in the crypto field, and they are developing thousands of new companies that are going to emerge over the next 10 years and are going to transform our economy. That will establish a new, on the one hand, a new security model for the internet, which it absolutely needs. I mean, the existing internet security model is bankrupt. And a new financial system for the world economy, because, and this is a more controversial claim, but I believe that the current system of central banks and floating currencies is as bankrupt as the security model of the internet.
So I agree with that, and I want to hit the first point in a second, but I'm going to hit the second point first, because I always sort of feel each new form of currency over the past 5,000 years solves the problems of the older form of currency. So paper money obviously solved the problems of metals, and to some extent, fiat money solved the problems of paper money that was backed by metals. And now cryptocurrencies are solving the problems of kind of centralized government, Federal Reserve style money. Because instead, if you were in China and I wanted to send you money, instead of going through my bank, then my local bank, reserve bank, then my Federal Reserve, then the SWIFT wiring system, then your federal bank, then your local reserve bank, then your real bank, where every step of the way there are fees, every step of the way there's human error,
and
every step of the way there's no
definitely
privacy.
human error. I'm being paid from China, and it is absolutely bizarrely difficult to get compensated.
Right, so this is a real problem.
These are people trying to pay me, but they can't do it. The only way they can pay me is give me cash.
So in a global economy, which we've been moving towards for the past 50 years, you need to solve these problems, and cryptocurrency is the only solution that's come across that solves them. So do you see cryptocurrencies as just being kind of an introduction to blockchain, and the world will focus on the blockchain technology, or where do you see the value in the currency still?
I think the cryptocurrencies are vital. I think that Satoshi tried to create Bitcoin as a new form of gold, and he made fundamental errors. He spent too much time in universities, and he imagined that gold was running out, that somehow that in order to have a cryptocurrency that mimicked gold, it would have to be capped, because gold obviously would be exhausted at some point. And similarly, we had to have mining and with Bitcoin.
But with Bitcoin,
this was a mistake. This was a fundamental mistake.
But Bitcoin's it could fractionalize, to any extent. So it's almost as if you're just talking about a function of, will the Bitcoin price go up as it fractionalizes?
Well, the question is whether Bitcoin actually becomes money or not. I think we don't have real money in the world today, because money intrinsically is a real thing. It's measures. It's a measuring stick, and I think that what it measures ultimately is time. That time is what remains scarce when everything else becomes abundant. And if you're gonna, and money, if it's going to be a measuring stick for the allocation of resources and and the guidance for investment, for trade-offs between opportunities, it can't float. It has to actually register real scarcity. And I think all measuring sticks, as Système International in Paris has discovered, are ultimately based on time. The measuring sticks that enable world trade, for example, the second, the meter, the kilogram, the degree Kelvin, the lumen, the ampere, the mole, all these measuring sticks that allow you to design a microchip in Tel Aviv and manufacture it in Taipei and assemble it on a circuit board in Shenzhen and market it in Cupertino or wherever. What makes that kind of supply chain possible is that the measuring sticks don't float. The measuring sticks are all based on physical constants. And when you examine the physical constants in every case, as I've done, you find they all have a frequency in them somewhere. And that, in other words, they're all ultimately governed by the speed of light, the ultimate scarcities in the universe. And the reason trade today is so contentious, and why the whole world economy is convulsed with battles over valuation, is that the biggest industry in the world economy today is currency trading. $5.1 trillion a day of currency trading. That's 75 times almost all the trade in goods and services. It's 25 times all global GDP. And it doesn't even arrive at a measuring stick, at a value that an entrepreneur can depend upon in pricing his goods. He has to, in order to use these floating currencies, he has to hedge every transaction across borders. It's a complete failure. It's not a success. And until we understand that money is a real thing, it was gold until 1971. And the key property of gold is it measured time, which I explain in my book. I can explain it to you, but it's essentially gold cancels the advance of technology and capital. And leaves the time to extract it as pretty much a constant over the millennia, and as a result, it became the only real money.
So, I mean, I think that's fascinating. So it doesn't seem necessarily in conflict with crypto.
It isn't. The crypto will definitely arrive. By their process of experiment and learning, they will eventually arrive at real money and displace these floating currencies, which are spurious money.
Right, and so crypto has a more direct connection, say, to time potentially than gold, which maybe some country finds a mine and we have to go to that country to extract the gold and so on. So it's sort of more random where you find gold around the world. And that's been kind of the problem a little bit with money, particularly like when the U.S. was inflating and overspending, we didn't have enough gold. So that was the problem. But with crypto, you could put, whoever is innovating will have the money.
Yeah, I think crypto is a real opportunity to improve on gold as a monetary standard. However, gold should not be underestimated because it doesn't corrode. So all the gold in the world remains. So the incremental impact of mining in any particular year is relatively insignificant. So the price is incredibly stable and incredibly related to the time to extract it. And that's really why gold has been the exemplary money for most of human history. And certainly since Isaac Newton really formed the gold standard and ignited the Industrial Revolution in two ways. I think his gold standard was just about as original and important as his Principia discovering macrophysics.
So are you sort of disconnecting blockchain technology, which is this trust factor, and allowing for peer-to-peer and smart contracts and so on? Are you disconnecting that technology from crypto as a currency in your mind, or are they still?
No. They're both. It's all part of a creative movement. I like Hashgraph, which is Hedera, which is a different format of crypto. It's based on all the same essential cryptological functions, the Merkle tree and the gossip protocol and all these methods of creating a blockchain have also been deployed by Hashgraph, but they avoid several key steps in most blockchains. The consensus protocol is performed without actual proven consensus through voting. They have a mathematical consensus that they generate through virtual voting. It's a really fascinating. So all I'm saying is there are lots of creativity out there, and Hashgraph comes from Carnegie Mellon, which where you come from too, with a lot of good things from.
I'm proud of it. I was thrown out of graduate school though, so I don't know. But so what do you see are the next steps then for crypto as an industry and the currency? That type of currency, eventually replacing centralized government money.
Well, I think that there are a lot of efforts to actually tie to gold, and that will sort of create a stable coin standard that from which I think it will be possible to launch digital algorithms that can perform better as money than the various contraptions of gold and fiat that actually did perform best in the history of money.
I mean,
I think we're on the verge of a emergence of a better global money, and that better global money will resolve these ridiculous trade conflicts between U.S. and China, which is just they're silly. And but they aren't really trade conflicts; they're money conflicts. And as a new global money emerges, real money, I think that we can have a new great era of capitalism after this current period of doldrums.
And that global currency is going to be, you're saying, is going to be crypto based / blockchain based.
Yep.
You know, blockchain being just essentially, I'm calling it blockchain, but that's the umbrella of all the things you're talking about, like the hash graph, the Merkle tree, and all that. So blockchain's like the umbrella of that, and makes use of the cryptography and so on to keep these transactions secure. Let's just look at cryptocurrencies as a whole. What do you see as a timeline for and Bitcoin's under that, but so is Ethereum, so is Zcash, so is all these other currencies. What do you see as a timeline for, let's say, the next so-called crypto boom, or when it could start making a real dent in?
I think it's starting. We're just in the underwater period. You know, everybody's out there. I've visited these companies. They're working like mad, and they're trying to solve the security problems of the internet, the monetary problems of the world economy. They're addressing our current predicament, and I think they're going to be emerging just as the internet emerged in the early 2000s after a appalling crash of 2000 that both of us experienced vividly. And I think that, but also Google and Facebook and all these other companies, Amazon, all emerged. And I think we're going to have a similar experience over the next 20 years. You know,
right, because it could be the case that everybody views themselves as, let's call it a company, for lack of a better word, where my company, James Inc., has my data and also has all my sources of income coming into it. Yeah. And then I can maybe securitize it or by selling off a piece of my income or a piece of my data forever. Or maybe also I make transactions.
We'll have equities again. You know, we don't have equities now. I mean, it's really... that's a great opportunity that what is Sam Lesson was today's Information has this nice argument about how a key role of cryptocurrencies are going to be create all new forms of equity, and this is really critical because debt is become a kind of doomsday pot in the world economy today. We have $250 trillion of debt that's been generated at incredibly low interest rates by all these central banks ultimately. And that is a real threat. It portends a series of financial crises in the future. So the whole idea that equities are something that have to be really closely regulated, and you don't want people to issue them promiscuously, and you want to be sure that they're qualified investors with at least a couple degrees from Carnegie Mellon before you can really be allowed to issue stock in your ventures, while anybody can borrow whenever you want. There's just a mass interest is deductible from your taxes. I mean, the whole system favors debt over equity. And debt is much lower information than equity, and it's not as good a way to finance enterprise. And so one of the things that the cryptocurrency movement is doing is generating new ways, new paths to issuing equity. And I hope this is one of the few things that the Muslims kind of got right. And Muslim economics may have lots of flaws, but they do understand that equity is better than debt. And that's something that may be a unity that's emerging from this new movement.
Well, you look at current uses of crypto and blockchain technology. Like, people think just because the price of a Bitcoin goes down, that suddenly this happened to me in 2000 or 2001. I was running a venture capital firm, and as soon as internet stocks started to go down, one of my partners was a Wall Street banker, and this is a story, but I had an arcade game in my office. He smashed the window of my arcade game, and he yelled, "The internet is a scam," and he just walked out. I never saw him again. And I sort of feel like the same thing is happening now. That his price fell for a year, so everyone's crying, and guys like Jamie Dimon at J.P. Morgan are saying, "Oh, it's a scam." But the reality is, you go to J.P. Morgan's finance department, they're reinventing trade finance and factoring all with blockchain and Zcash. Zcash is blockchain because of the privacy. So they're transforming their debt operations into more blockchain operations. And so that's what's already happening. What I wonder is it the technology, or is it the currency, or are they both together?
I think they're both together. They really are a whole new paradigm for a new internet and a new world economy. And so it's the new paradigm that's follows the old paradigm.
And because supply is somewhat fixed for either reliable coins or even the supply of some of these coins, it kind of means the way to play it is price is going to go up in these cryptocurrency exchanges.
I think so. I think that ultimately we want to look for stable coins, currencies that root their scarcity in the ultimate scarcity of time that actually is the fundamental scarcity in the universe as it affects human enterprise.
Yeah, it's fascinating to link it to time. So let me ask you this idea. This is an idea I have. It's not in your book, and I know they want me to. He's about to tell me to wrap up in a second, but I do like this idea that cryptocurrencies, rather than any equity thing, crypto is a good way to securitize yourself. So if I want to say so-and-so is graduating a great college, he's really smart, we'll take out the college part. He's really smart, he knows how to program, he seems really entrepreneurial. I'm willing to pay him 5% or her 5% for her future income. Seems like crypto is a good way to do it, because with blockchain, I can trust that future income is going to go in that black box. There's nothing funky with accountants or escrows or law firm. You remove all those intermediaries. It's just in the software. It's the smart contracts in the software. I kind of think that there should be a worldwide people exchange.
Well, that's just what crypto offers. I mean, economies ultimately prosper in proportion as they release the creativity of human minds. And human minds are not all agglomerated in clouds and concentrated in data warehouses next to glaciers and windmills. It's in human minds, which are the ultimate singularity. And they're imprinted with DNA that actually represents the kind of private key through which in the cryptocosm we can participate individually in the global economy.
So, and you're saying essentially because of all the regulations, all the fees, all the problems with like fiat money and current equities, cryptocurrency and the technologies around it and the problems that are being solved every day right now in that space are going to be the next way that this creativity gets unlocked.
That's
as opposed to, let's say, the engineers still at Google or Facebook or whatever.
That's right. That's essentially what Life After Google says, is that the models and the philosophies, indeed the system of the world expressed by the current Silicon Valley generation is being displaced by a new generation that is plighting its trust to the cryptocosm.
Praise Jesus. I totally agree with everything you say. George Gilder, futurist extraordinaire. I've been following your stuff forever. It feels like I'm so happy to actually. The great thing about doing a podcast is I actually get to meet you face to face, and I get to meet all these amazing people face to face. Your book, Life After Google, is a must read for people who want to understand even the history of technology, let alone the future of technology. I really love how you kind of use your beginning stuff on security and then Gödel and then von Neumann and then going straight up into Google and Facebook and then cryptocurrencies and blockchain. It's just a wonderful way of telling the story of this past century of technology and what's to come. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I highly recommend the book, Life After Google. If you're going to read any tech book, read Life After Google. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on your show.
I hope when I'm 80, I'm running 5 miles, because I don't even run 5 miles now. Maybe I got to start training now. So thanks.
Right, thank you.
Your daily dose of gaming just got way more epic with the Snapdragon processor powering the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra. Snapdragon processors give you the premium mobile experience that triggers your inner champion. Whenever you want, wherever you want. Get ready for edge-of-your-seat performance, advanced customizations, ultra-realistic graphics, and adrenaline-boosting speeds that have the power to move you in more ways than one. Follow us on Instagram at Snapdragon Official.